Hey guys, Load354 doing a response video for 5ATG on the subject of nerds and geeks. Yes, I have filmed 3 videos in a row here, so don't think I've been wearing this jumper for a whole week. I've been wearing it for about 20 minutes. Nerds and geeks. The big one, the first thing I feel I need to say about this one is that in my mind a nerd and a geek are different. They can be close, and a geek and a nerd can be, you can have someone who is a geek and a nerd at the same time, but I feel that they are, in my mind, at least the stereotypical geek and nerd is a different thing. A nerd is probably the best one to start with, because it's easiest explained, is someone who's bookish and enjoys academical pursuits. Prime example of your textbook nerd is Peter Parker from Spider-Man in the original comics, where he's into science and his chemistry and his math, and that's what he does, not only as schoolwork but as pastime. This is his hobby, is academic pursuits. So that's a nerd. A geek is someone... A geek's the more hard one to explain, because a geek's been watered down and diluted from its original stereotypical form, because, as has been said by other people, you get things like football geeks and boat geeks and so on. Whereas I would have said the original culmination of the word would be someone who is overly excited and interested in fantasy. And that sounds a bit weird, so let me explain. When I'm talking about fantasy, I am talking about things like video games, because back in the day it was all fantasy. It was all Dungeons and Dragons and Zelda and sci-fi, Contra, etc. Same with books, Discworld, William Gibson, Sword of Shannara, all of that, Lord of the Rings. Then you know, film into Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, and so on, and comic books, superheroes. It's all comes under the broad heading of fantasy, because it's not it's, you know, fantastical. So that would be my broad definition of a geek. Now obviously the two cross over, nerd and geek, because A, they are both socially awkward. That tends to be the thing. They don't like going out and socialising with hundreds and hundreds of people and going down the pub and just hanging out with people they don't like and hate. They tend to have close-knit groups of friends who they stick with, and don't really like going and meeting new people because they might be prats. So that's, and so they do, and another way they cross over is obviously they like the same things. So example, a nerd's bookish but will play Dungeons and Dragons as a hobby and will be interested in fantasy, and people who are into fantasy tend to be quite bookish. So a you get a gurk. A nerd and a geek can cross over. But nowadays, as I've said, I think the word geek in specific has been watered down, because fantasy has become pretty common. Most people will quite happily read fantasy books, you know. Terry Pratchett got knighted for his works. Video games, who doesn't have a video games console in the house? You know, that's pretty standard. TV, Doctor Who's one of the most popular TV shows on TV at the moment. Same with things like Star Trek, because of the movies. Comic books, because of all the comic book films that are coming out. Comic books have become socially acceptable. So to become a geek nowadays, you have to be more geeky than you used to be. You know, you can't, you know, watching Doctor Who is acceptable, but collecting the box sets and collecting the classics is geeky. Having a couple of comics based on some movies, like a couple of Batman and The Watchmen, is fine. But having 3 bookshelves full of comic books becomes geeky. And so on. So that's my definition of nerd and geek. And nerds do exist because it's bookish people. They still do exist. Geeks do still exist, but have been watered down somewhat. Going into the things like geek chic, which have been mentioned, basically the people who are geek chic pretend they're geeks, but actually I've met a few people who are into geek chic, and yeah, you go, oh, do you watch? Oh, I watch all Doctor Who. Oh, brilliant! What did you think of this second season and the way it linked? You know, what do you think of this episode and the way it linked to this Tom Baker episode? Huh? You know, or oh, you like Batman movies? Oh, brilliant! You know, have you read Nightfall and the idea of him getting his back broken? Huh? So, in my mind, geek chic isn't being geeky, it's just people pretending to be geeky because it's cool. When actually, if they actually tried to be properly geeky, they'd get scared and run away because it's too geeky. Anyway, after talking around in circles for a while, I think that's me. Cheers, guys. It's additional footage time! Just been editing this and wanted to add in an extra point, which was originally made by moviebob Chipman. I will put a thing in the doobly-doo linking to the original source material, but basically it comes down to this, that the geeks have taken over Hollywood and the nerds have taken over the world. What does this mean? Well, two of the biggest real-life geeks I can think of would be George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Simple as that. And the two biggest real-life nerds would be, very simply put, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. So there you are. Toodle pip.